What's going on, Imperials? It's Emperor Cubone here. You've heard all about how important gym leaders are to their respective regions, and how they can help to shape its personality, or how you perceive a given generation. However, just because a trainer might be popular or tailor-made for a specific region, doesn't mean that they actually perform all that well given the circumstances. Sometimes a gym leader, despite their best efforts, is just not able to stand up to where they're placed in the region. Maybe if there were a different type specialist in that spot, they could do better. So then, what if they could swap with a different gym leader? Maybe they can call each other up and offer a full-blown trade. Like, imagine if, say, Brock moved to the Hoenn region as the Rustboro leader, only to let Roxanne move over to Kanto as its first gym leader. Although that wouldn't really do much because they're both Rock-type users. I mean, they even share a Geodude. So instead, let's look at a better example, like what made me think of this in the first place, Roxy. Black and White 2 gave us an early detour, letting Roxy fill in as the second gym leader for Unova. However, a Poison-type specialist might not do so well in Verbank City, since the Verbank complex allows you to grab a Steel Pokémon to be totally immune to her poison, with her best hope being some Dark-type coverage moves that your Riolu would resist anyway. So then, who among the second gym leaders would be able to better weather the Verbank ecosystem? Well, looking at all of them, I think Grant would be the most capable. This Rock-type trainer exclusively uses fossil Pokémon, with Amara and Tyrant, who would seemingly be better than Poison, mostly because nobody around would actually be able to learn any Steel-type attacks, so you don't have to worry about that as a weakness. And you don't even have to worry about Grass-type attacks coming in, because you've got an Ice-type to handle that, and even Water is tempered by the half-Dragon type that he's got. Now, if Roxy won't just stick to her day job as a rock star, she could go to take on the Silage City Gym, which might be great against people trying to test out that new fairy type, giving her an edge. So perhaps a trade between these two leaders would be mutually beneficial, and they might be even better off as transplants to a new region. And obviously they're allowed to redecorate so that Roxy wouldn't be stuck having to rock climb, or vice versa. Another that's pretty obvious to me is Lieutenant Serge being right next to Diglett's cave, so you can load up on a whole team of ground types, or just catch one over-leveled Dugtrio that you definitely shouldn't have yet. So maybe Serge elected to be so disadvantaged as some sort of training, but somebody else could easily do better. Well, of all the other third gym leaders out there, I'm thinking that Maylene from Sinnoh could be a good substitute. She's a fighting-type trainer, so the Diglett wouldn't be unfair against her, and it actually helps her out a lot, because as it turns out, right before Veilstone City, you can capture Wild Kadabra. Not even Abra, they are evolved and packing psychic moves. Not to mention the vast amount of bug or flying or even ghost types that you could pick up across Sinnoh by then to easily resist her punchy Pokémon. So it really benefits Maylene to move over to Kanto that's littered with normal types for her to destroy if you've got a bunch of those on your team. And sure, there are other flying or bug types, but her Lucario would mitigate those opponents as well, since Kanto doesn't even know what Steel is. And even with Psychic's dominance in Gen 1, they were not all that prominent before the Vermilion Gym. So Maylene should be in a better spot here, but let's not forget about Serge, who gets done a favor by moving to Veilstone, because there's really only one Pokemon line you'd be using by the third gym in Sinnoh, and even then Serge's Raichu can get Double Kick to counter the rock. So I think Lieutenant Serge really works in Veilstone, and just his presence probably would have deterred Team Galactic from setting up their headquarters there. So I was unsure about this, but it seems to really work out for both of these third gym leaders. And don't worry about doubling up with Volkner, because he was about ready to quit anyway, so we'll just get someone else for that slot. Now, if we're gonna be looking at some trainers that struggle in their placement, I think we've got to consider Wulfric. He does put up a good fight, but he's also an Ice-type trainer, which means he's quite frail, especially when he's got pure Ice types, and one that's probably the worst combination in the whole series. At least Lorelei got to have some types paired with Ice to lessen the threats, and even some non-Ice types involved on her team too, so she's leagues above Wulfric. And even more crippling is his spot as the final gym leader, meaning that you've got all the time in the world to prepare. Even with his massive physical defense, all you need is one moderately strong fire attack to exploit the special side, so where else might Wulfric be able to blossom as the final gym leader? Well, it actually would have been great if he could have created some kind of ice-based trial in Alola, but there's not really anyone there to trade with. It would just be nice to have a little more fanfare than just going and picking up the Z Crystal and that's it. But if we had to trade it out for another 8th gym leader, I think it could be possible for Wulfric to stand up pretty decently in Kanto, swapping him out for Giovanni. You do still have the whole game to prepare, but Ice would have it a bit easier in Gen 1, with a whole weakness being absent. As we mentioned, Steel isn't really there. And we know that Pokemon in the early days had pitifully small move pools, learning next to no attacks of their actual types, giving most everyone normal. So even if you did catch a lot of fighting or rock types, they could do very little using underpowered physical attacks against an Avalugg. But also, most Kanto games are before the physical special split too, meaning that really the only threat that Wulfric would ever have to worry about is fire. So I think that he's in a much better place being in charge of the Viridian City Gym than he ever was in Snowbell. As for whether or not that means he's the new boss of Team Rocket, I'll leave that one up to you. And then that, of course, sets Giovanni in the Kalos region, and I think he could also do well, largely because we don't even have a ground-type specialist in the region. That's probably because they only offered up one new ground-type in Gen 6, but Giovanni can bring over his own Pokemon on top of the past ones found throughout Kalos. I know that we haven't talked about actually switching to new Pokemon much today. I'm mostly thinking that they wouldn't do that, but the idea of Giovanni picking up a dragon is too enticing to ignore. So if he allowed his devious mind to use all of the tools at his disposal, I have no doubt that Giovanni would rival all of Team Flare single-handed. But let's look at the opposite side with first gym leaders. One that I feel could be in a bit of a rough spot is Katy from Scarlet and Violet. Since the Paldea region has way more options than usual, there are so many things capable of squashing her bug types, so she needs to be vacated to another location. But that also means swapping anyone else into Cortando would still have to face the overwhelming onslaught of team configurations. So who could stand up to that? I actually think that swapping with Cheren would fit perfectly here. It's quite easy to forget that he counts as the first gym leader in Black and White 2, but for a normal type trainer, he is famously strong. You could still try and collect fighting types to beat him, but his workup strategy to buff his attack is able to do a lot of work in the early stages of the game, because Cheren can still even beat the requisite Riolu in Unova with all of his boosted stats. Plus he has Detect on his Patrat to boot. So I think this rival-turned-leader would be able to hold down the first Paldean gym just fine. That means Katy would move over to Western Unova, which I think works out great for her too. Unova famously has very limited early routes, so there's nothing close by to topple Bug. But even if you venture out to grab a rarer flying type, there's also not terastallizing in the Unova region, so her Teddiursa is still a normal type and not weak to it. I think this would make Katy go from mediocre at best to a real top contender in that area of the region. I guess she could also be friends with Grant now too, since we changed that one, so that's interesting. But I also wanted to look at who is probably the most forgettable gym leader of all time, Janine. She is understandably left out sometimes because she is only a Kanto gym leader in the post-game sections of Johto games. Not to mention she shared the same type as her father, so it's easy to see how she might fade into the background. So let's fix that and set her up somewhere else. While it might not mean as much in the more open post-game, Janine is still listed as the 5th gym leader. So when looking at that group, I feel like she might suitably be able to flip with Opal, the Fairy-type specialist from the Galar region. This elderly actress is found in the Balanlee Stadium, so if Janine were there instead, she could be a representative for Poison that was only ever in the minor leagues at best in Galar once Clara showed up. This would also put Janine right next to the Glimwood Tangle, which works out pretty okay because there are a lot of Fairy types there for her to beat, and even the Psychic types that live there can be countered by her numerous Bug types. Plus, wouldn't it be super cool to see Koga's daughter randomly show up in Galar with no fanfare? What a fun reference that would be. As for Opal, that would put her over in Kanto, which would actually work out great because Fairy didn't exist back then. And we've already got all of the other types across the sister regions in the Johto games, except for Ground for some reason. Come on, guys. And Janine was already copying a type covered by her dad in the Elite Four. So using Fairy as a new type would enrich the experience to not only only have a more complete picture of the type chart, but to be able to confound everyone with an element that they've never seen before would give Opal the edge back, since she's not exactly allowed to Gigantamax here. Besides, being the only fairy-type gym leader across the first 5 generations might even rejuvenate her career, so swapping with Janine would really help both of them to stand out more than they do now. However, I'm sure that there are other gym leaders that could be traded out to have both of them perform better and be remembered more fondly. Maybe we could even get some of the trial captains in on it too. It would be extra fun to compare them as well. Which gym leaders would you most like to improve through trading? Let me know down in the comments. Also, be sure to leave a like, share this video, and subscribe so that you too can become an Imperial today. And until next time, stay grounded!